Coming to you from a cozy little condo high atop old Fourth Ward, Atlanta. Welcome to The Ron Show on America One Radio. Here's your host, Ron Roberts.
It's hard to wrap our minds around the fact that we are living through an historical moment, a moment that we hope future generations will look back at and dissect and question so much what's going on, as we are, a lot of us are doing currently. It's funny, I have so much that I want to talk about from Roswell, Georgia, North Fulton County, a gentleman from Cumming, Georgia, who took on Elon Musk. And I want to get into all that, as I am, of course, based in Atlanta, Georgia, and I like to cover local stories as much as possible for not just my Atlanta and Georgia and South audience, but folks who are listening from coast to coast throughout the continent and around the world. Trust me, this will all lead to, I think, a common theme of today's show. So it was 8 days ago that I got this email from author Michelle Stiles. Wanted to come on my show. She says she's a teacher, author, a knack for simplifying complex ideas, and she's written a new book. It's called One Idea to Rule Them All, Reverse Engineering American Propaganda. Well, me being an old radio guy who used to copyright a lot for not just my radio stations, my companies, station branding, imaging, morning show stuff, and of course, clients who occasionally needed some help with that as well, and salespeople, I was drawn to this. I want to read a particular section that caught my eye as I was scanning through this to prepare for this interview. Chapter 10, Planet Vulnerable, Tyranny in a Democracy. And by the way, Michelle's on the phone. Thank you for joining me this morning. I know it's like super early where you are, so bear with me while I read through this piece of work of yours, and then let's dive right in. How does one convert a democracy, or rather a republic, into a tyranny, she writes. Most people would say that it can be done. The people are supposed to rule through their elected representatives. They work for us, right? America was set up as the ultimate bulwark against tyranny. The founders created multiple checks and balances so that no one branch of government could become too strong. We all know this from civics class. She continues, they also created two chambers of the legislature to ensure that the rights of states would not be overshadowed by simple majority rule or federal overreach. Sure, some citizens have vague feelings that the government has become less responsive, or sense that there are more bad apples in government than ever before. But the alarm switch that should trigger the potent potential of a growing tyranny never gets activated. After all, she writes, we the people are still in charge. We have elections, a free press, the rule of law, the Bill of Rights, and the Constitution in place to protect us. For most people, the solid framework of freedom still stands. The answer is to get the right people into office, and then the ship will correct itself. It's nothing to worry about. Seeing tyranny and propaganda at work in a democracy can be hard. Michelle, thank you for joining me. I do appreciate that. I really wanted to zone in on that particular section of your book because as I let off the show, I feel like we're living through a moment in history that our descendants may look back on and really dissect. When you were writing this book, I'm not even sure that you had politics so much as the centerpiece of what you were writing about. But our American culture is a very propagandized culture. And I think that's the overarching theme of this book, and that deprogramming ourselves in some respect, it's a gargantuan task. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, Ron. First of all, thank you for having me this morning. And I think you've really nailed it. If you picked probably one of the most important, ideas of the book, really. Orwell and Huxley kind of had it right. They had two tyranny models.
Mm-hmm.
One was the overt, boot on the neck force model. Mm-hmm. And then Huxley, he talked about basically the deceptive, manipulative seduction, if you will. Mm-hmm. There was a professor, Harold Laswell, that was part of the In group in the early 1900s, or 20th century rather, early 1900s. And, he basically says that in his book. He was a professor of political science. He basically said, you guys are going to throw off the tyranny of the aristocracy and the landed ruler. Okay, fine. Expect seduction. That's what he said. And, I mean, that's pretty like right in your face, right? You want to throw off chains of iron, he said, you're going to get chains of silver. And we just haven't realized what they've done because they've infected the trusts. And I have a quote around that, right? The things that we look to in our society, they've gamed them. And, what I was amazed to find is as I was digging back into this, and if you stay on the word propaganda, you're going to find a real limited track, right?
Mm-hmm.
You're going to find, Bernays and, and you're going to think, wartime propaganda, which is, of course, it's the other enemy, spreading lies.
Mm-hmm.
And we kind of justify that because after all, lives are at stake, right? But for peacetime propaganda, we've only that word has only recently come back in the lexicon, right? And now both sides are beating the other side over the head with a bludgeon, right? You guys are the guys, the right has the fake news and the lies and the mistruths, and the other side. And I really appreciate your show because you're trying to walk a middle sane, road down the center, if you will. Trying to pick what's good from both sides, right?
Well, here's the interesting thing. I didn't even ask Michelle when we booked this. What is your political ideology? I had absolutely no idea. And Michelle, I'll go ahead and correct you a little bit. This is a left of center show. I'm very much a progressive, but I try and frame my show as being a fair progressive show. In that I'm willing to critique Democrats or even liberals or progressives when I feel like they've run afoul or kind of gotten off track or gotten a little hyperbolic, overreacting to things that are happening, in a Trump era, for example. And of course, I'm going to call out Republicans for, the mass quantities of hypocrisy. They give me too much material, honestly.
Yeah.
So that's interesting. And again, just so the audience knows, I had no idea whatsoever what Michelle Stiles' political ideology is. I just found the subject fascinating.
Yeah. And and that's why, like you said, I'm not really trying to study politics. I wanted to know, how are they doing this?
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
How are they almost creating false realities?
Yeah.
So, one of the things that you, if you look at it like this, think of propaganda as mercenary speech for hire.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Paid speech. All right. Now, and a lot of times they use mercenary statesmen or mercenary intermediaries, right? These are people who do what they need for money, and they do it for a mercenary end.
Wow.
Okay.
I love that terminology. I'm going to adopt that. Just know that going forward, that's what I'm going to adopt. Every time I talk about conservative talk radio or cable news. Yeah. I mean,
Yeah. So that's actually not in my book. I came to those terms a little bit later.
Cool.
But anyways, so you remember, that mercenary end game is money. It's not public public opinion change.
Yep.
Okay, so you don't spend. Okay, so here's another just basic concept, right? I can't get up on my soapbox in the morning and change public opinion. Nobody's going to listen to me. So to change public opinion at a state level or regional, or obviously, going further global, I need reach. I need to reach large numbers of people, and to do that, I need massive amounts of money. Okay, now who are the three groups that can utilize this tool? Right? Well, you have organizations, right? Nonprofit organizations.
Mm-hmm.
Then you have organizations like, trade groups, right?
Right.
Trade associations, interested organs.
Interest groups.
Yeah. Okay. And then government.
Mm-hmm.
But for the most part, and I love this term, this is kind of an older term that they used to use. It's the holders of wealth who are behind those three groups. Now, let's just throw out fairly, throw out your, maybe Red Cross or something like that. But, most of these groups are funded either by foundations or directly by holders of wealth. Okay, so they do the propaganda, right, for a monetary gain. Yeah. Right? It's not,
Oh, yeah, to benefit them, yeah.
There was a great, there was an investigation, and the guy was an industrialist, and he was asked, why are you guys doing propaganda all the time? Because NAM, National Association of Manufacturers, were heavily engaged for years, spending like $100 million a year, believe it or not. for a period before the Second World War, and then for $100 billion a year, or $1 billion a year for like 4 years after World War II.
Mm-hmm.
But he was asked, why are you guys doing that? He said, because it's so much easier to go, like if legislation is, getting right to the edge where they're going to pass it to take away their, like let's say their private ownership of utilities, and we want to stop that. He said it's much easier to go upstream of the ideas and make it so that people never want to even think about that.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Yeah. So I mean, so they know, so they're doing it in advance, right? And this is the manipulated thing. We want you to like what we're going to give you, or want what we're going to give you. Okay. And that's the seduction. That's the manipulation. And the thing that, they have to use the trust that we believe in, the things that we kind of anchor our world in. And that's where I talk about those shortcuts and the infrastructure of belief.
See, what interests me about all of this stuff is, I'm looking today at the current mindset that I think permeates, in specific, the MAGA subset of Republican voter base.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of anger, distrust in government, and a lot of it stems from just going back 25 years, the now disbelief in what we were propagandized, what we were told to believe about 9/11 and why we needed to invade not just one country, but another country at the same time, and mired ourselves in 2-decade wars in 2 different fronts, trillions of dollars spent, thousands of lives lost, hundreds of thousands of lives lost over there. And there is a disconnect. There is an anger. There are folks who are Trump supporters, for example, who look at establishment Republicans from that era and think, you lied to us, you misled us. And the truth of the matter is, they just used an old trick, one of the oldest tricks in the book when it comes to politics, and that is, ginning up, stirring up sentiment in a vulnerable time and propagandizing the war effort. We know that after World War II, in order to sell bonds and encourage recruitment into the military, they literally sent around a band of people to reenact the flagging of Iwo Jima. They did it in large stadiums throughout the country to try and stir that up. We still, to this day, have militarized halftime shows and pregame shows funded by the U.S. military, literally funded by the U.S. military before football games. And that's not at all unrelated. It's what convinces the least among us to sign up to join the military, to go fight wars that they don't really have nearly as much stake in as the folks who hold the wealth.
Absolutely. Like that's where, like, one of the things that got me really digging was, have you ever read the book by George Creel? He was the head of Committee on Public Information, called How We Advertised America.
No, I have not.
Okay, it's him doing a victory lap after World War I, and he's basically crowing about, it was the greatest sales job in the history of the world, up until that time, which is, it's really noxious because, you should either have this is my naivete, but, you should have good reason for going to war or not,
Right.
But this guy was just, basically saying they spent $6.6 million to convince our forefathers to fight in a war they did not want to fight in. Mm-hmm. They really did not, which is to your point. You know what I mean? They're always, doing things. And there's plenty of really good books on, how much they made, 500 times their money, the profit margin during the war. Right. And they were always getting concessions, and it's happened in every war. Right. So I'm totally with you on that. And people, I think currently right now, we are the most propagandized people on the planet, yes, in the history of the world.
Right.
Because we just, like when I talk about mercenary speech, it's 24/7 $1 trillion industry swirling around us. And so I try to tell people, look, if you try to have a conversation here, there's so many landmines when we're talking to each other, like, oh, I blew that up. No, we're both on sides of the fence, and now we're punching at each other like Punch and Judy, And it's like, okay, just go back in history, learn where this came. What were the problems that like the holders of wealth had problems. You read and I have on my Substack now, I'm trying to reconstitute the voices of these prophetic men that spoke about the concentration of power in the country at that time. They're like, you're not going to have a democracy because that power is too big.
Yeah.
Right. And so they were grappling with many of the things that we are, and mostly we got cosmetic sham legislation and, here, throw this bone to the people and it won't do anything really. And we've got all the lawyers, writing any teeth out of this bill, but we'll proclaim it. Everybody will proclaim it as a wonderful victory. Yeah. And so,
I call that the Obama presidency, honestly, because there was a lot of that. A lot of,
everyone, I think, really, because like I tell people, it's like, I think we actually missed the death of our own country.
That is profound. And I want to dive into the concept you label idea bullying. I want to take a quick break because I need to do that for my network folks. Okay. We are with author Michelle Stiles, author of the book, One Idea to Rule Them All, Reverse Engineering American Propaganda. Heady discussion. We'll pick back up on that after this quick break. On The Ron Show, America One Radio, Progressive Voices via TuneIn. By the way, you can follow The Ron Show on your preferred social media platforms. That's at Ron Show ATL. Blue Sky, Facebook, I'm still there. Instagram, Twitter X, not giving up the fight there just yet. Where else? I think I mentioned them all. At Ron Show ATL. Michelle Stiles, author of the book, One Idea to Rule Them All, Reverse Engineering American Propaganda. Tell us what idea bullying is.
Well, I think it's a concept that takes the larger idea marketplace in view, right? So if you just sit back, and most of us don't look at it like this, but if you say, where do ideas come from, and how can we get at the choke points or the headwaters of these ideas and control the population, right? So you just don't. It's not just news and media, right? So that's kind of sometimes we're short-sighted on that. And so the idea bullies don't want to fight a fair fight. They don't want to have to argue their points. They just want to inject these ways of influencing us that Le Bon really talked about many years ago in The Crowd, A Study of the Popular Mind, right? And they don't use logic and reason. They do not. So this is why getting, some of the smartest people can be manipulated fairly easily, actually. And so, and I like to call it as well, and like an idea syndicate. So you have the news media, okay, and you have the public prints and the magazines, and now we have all the internet, social media, and the podcasts and all those groups. But we also have trust in society. So associations, right? So like I put in the Operation Spider's Web, right? You have corporations who send messages, right? The politicians do themselves, government and regulatory agencies, medicine, nonprofits, right? Policy groups, universities, the justice system, and even science. And so these are the things that we implicitly trust. But
I can also, by the way, say that you have corporations who hire science to create junk science.
Oh, absolutely.
It's twisted. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Right. No. So if you have enough money, so what I go into in the book is there's a book about foundations, their power and influence, that was written by a lawyer who participated in the Reese Committee, and they were investigating the foundations, right? And in the 1930s, when the universities were cash strapped, the big foundations, Carnegie, Rockefeller, Ford, stepped in and basically said, okay, here, we're going to give you this money, but we want our guys.
Yep.
And yeah, we're going to steer. Now, they didn't say directly. They would set up these intermediary groups called clearinghouses. All right. But they would put their guys, these mercenary intermediary, clear, and then they would steer. They'd say, well, geez, social science. They went after education first, poli-sci, and I'm going to blank on the third one right now. But anyways, so they created the clearinghouses, and they basically, put their men in there and said, this discipline is so big, we're going to prioritize what money is going to go to. And so, wow, you're like, so this guy testified at the committee, and he said, I've been told that I'm the oldest assistant professor east of the Mississippi, and that I'll never be a professor by his dean. And it was because you're not a foundation man. So that was happening way back in the 1930s. right?
Mm.
And so now, I mean, it's on steroids. The corporations are into the university on steroids. But there's always been, government money or corporation money. And so, like, you were saying corporations actually pay to get junk science, but there's an infiltration of the academia itself.
Yeah.
On a level that we're not aware of at all.
Oh, yeah, sure. Which leads to distrust from those who never reach that acumen, never reach those ranks as well. And I think that's why we're seeing some pushback from the right towards left-leaning institutions, and that therein lies a lot of hypocrisies that come out, on the left as well. I want to read a line from your Amazon notes about this book that just sort of gave me chills, and we'll take a quick break and pick up on this. Your ignorance of these techniques and the idea bullies use them gives them vast power over your future, your finances, and your children. I am so ready to expound on that. And then we'll talk a little bit about the aspect of deprogramming and what possibilities lie in that. We're with author Michelle Stiles. Her book is entitled One Idea to Rule Them All, Reverse Engineering American Propaganda. And you're hearing this conversation in full on The Ron Show on America One Radio, Progressive Voices via TuneIn.
This is The Ron Show on America One Radio.
My guest is author Michelle Stiles. She wrote the book One Idea to Rule Them All, Reverse Engineering American Propaganda. You might be surprised to learn that Michelle isn't like, a poli-science wonk or even a marketing expert, someone with a BS in mass communications or anything like that. She's a physical therapist, and I'm sure a really good one. And I'm not saying that to minimize you in any way, shape, form, or fashion. Listen, I tell people all the time, I'm like a 29th year dropout from the University of Georgia. I don't have a poli-science degree in mass communication or anything like that. I like to think that I'm able to grapple some complex concepts and bring them verbally to the mindset of someone who might be a college dropout, and I think that that might be something that you're triggering on here as well. You write a book that is really concise. You really did your research, but you write it in a way that doesn't lose the audience, and I think that's important. You know what? That's even a tool of propaganda in some respects. Wouldn't you agree?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, to get keep things separated, and you can't see the forest for the trees. Mm-hmm. Exactly.
So when we were heading out, I read a line from your Amazon review. Your ignorance of these techniques and the idea bullies using them gives them vast powers over your future, your finances, and your children. I thought that was pretty profound. We live in a society right now. One of the hot button issues that we're seeing some left-right sniping over is congestion pricing in New York City, for example. And hang with me. I promise this is going to lead somewhere. It's not so much that I want to discuss congestion pricing. It's that I understand living in Atlanta, a city that is not nearly as big as New York, not as traffic strapped, but is very much headed in that direction. We always joke, if you're in Atlanta, you're always just an hour from Atlanta because it can take a long time to get from one part of the city to another. We live in a culture in this country that loves the automobile, loves the open road, doesn't have nearly the reverence for mass transit or high-speed rail or even just hopping on a train. We love the vehicle. We are romanced and have been for decades by the car and the open road and even flying. This, to me, is another form of propaganda and something that is going to, as your quote said, have an influence over our future, our finances, and our kids. We can sit here and talk about the climate change issues, but I'm just talking about quality of life. Getting off your job and having to spend an hour in traffic to get home takes away time from the home. And I feel like there's a conversation to be had about how we got to where we are as a society, where we're so influenced by the vehicle and the highway and traffic to get back home from the job in the city to the suburbs, et cetera, and so on. Would you like to trigger on that a little bit?
Yeah, I think you're really right. I mean, I think we don't get to lead, society in a way to produce the communities we want to have in many ways.
No, we go on vacation to go to the communities that we love. We like Main Street Disney where we're all walking around, but we don't want to live in Main Street Disney apparently because of mass transit for some reason. It's not romanticized like the car is.
Right. Yeah, so these are, these are powerful groups influencing society. And until we actually really deal with that, I mean, public relations, after World War One, that industry just exploded.
Mm-hmm.
And, what Bernays laughed about in his book, he says, like, that woman who wants to have, cleaner food or doesn't want to have, a Wonder Bread, this is back in the 1920s, or is worried about the new food that's coming out. He just laughs. He goes, she's never going to be able to make any difference because she's not organized.
Mm-hmm.
And so, that's what we're, these are the tap roots. I mean, you can go to the tree is flowering in all kinds of ways that we don't want because, we don't really we're leaderless, right? A lot of the politicians, like I said, are mercenary statesmen. And then we have tons of other people, just are willing to promote anything for money, right? And so, I mean, I think that's one of the most difficult things that as a society we're going to have to grapple with. How do we, do we continue to allow that to take place, that paid operatives, because again, there really isn't, we have free speech, but we don't in any way have equal speech.
Mm-hmm.
So people say this, because even if you want to, it's like me, okay, I got a website, but how do I get the message out, right? I need money.
Yeah.
Right. And, or somebody else that has, a platform to spread it. But very difficult, for average people to make changes because we're going against so much going the other way. Does that make sense?
Oh, no, absolutely. It's funny. I only started watching Mad Men weeks ago. And I'm really late to the game on that. I freely admit that 18 years ago, this show came out and I'm watching as advertising executives in the 1960s are crafting messaging to win over hearts and minds of people for products that they know themselves aren't really good for the American public. There was an episode I watched recently where they talked about Israel in the 1960s and likened it to being a communist country full of Jewish people because they had kibbutzes, and kibbutzes are communes, and so the word communism is evoked, and we all know how Americans have come to loathe communism, and there are plenty of valid reasons to loathe communism. Most of that is, steeped in authoritarianism. I tell people all the time, the only problem with any word that ends with the letters ISM is the human element. Anything sounds good and can be done well until you bring in the human element. And that the same falls for capitalism. Unfettered capitalism is not a poor concept, except the human element comes into play and greed comes into play and the tribalism that this country is steeped in. We can talk about the Jim Crow era after Reconstruction and how Black citizens were demonized by manipulation, by propaganda, and how that continues to rear its head. We can talk about how propaganda has now steeped into the education system. The Root did a story a few years ago that pointed out so many of the history textbooks used by senators in the House, in the Senate today, Lindsey Graham, Marsha Blackburn, Ted Cruz even, Marco Rubio, were written by the United Daughters of the Confederacy. That is propaganda. It's deep. It's really deep.
Yeah, they keep us going at, I think one of the main objectives is propaganda of the propagandists is to never, step on the real problems. And if you do, suggest a false solution.
Right. Yes.
You know what I mean? So
Great. Yeah, great point. Georgia Republicans are trying to deal with homelessness. How are they going to do that? They're going to take money from the cities so that the cities have less money to deal with the homelessness as punishment for not dealing with the homelessness. That's a literal story I covered earlier this week.
Yeah. So, I mean, never really deal with it, and again, just have each other spinning away, shooting arrows and bullets across the aisle.
Yeah.
Mark Hanna was one of the ones who sort of professionalized the party system. I would highly recommend to your readers a book called The Politicos by Matthew Josephson.
Okay.
And he goes from the Civil War up to about the 1900s, and you'll see how repeatedly, the people's voice was thwarted. And then, around the turn of the century, Mark Hanna sort of, it was a spoiled system that they used money from a lot of different places, from the jobs. They would levy an assessment and got money back from those people, and they would use graft from the government, whatnot. But when Hanna got involved, they started basically just levying assessments to the corporations based on, how much GDP you contribute to, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so, and then they're basically funding both sides. So, it's a two-headed hydra, and they talk about it all the time around the 1900s. And somehow we just forget about it because the prints, which is our like collective memory, right?
Yeah.
The public prints are a collective memory. Here's what you're supposed to pay attention to right now.
Mm-hmm.
And it's never the real problem.
Right.
It's always something else.
Our guest is author Michelle Stiles, the book One Idea to Rule Them All, Reverse Engineering American Propaganda. And I think you go into diagnosing a little bit in hopes that I guess your reader picks up on some self-awareness in how to fix being propagandized. And we're all propagandized. No one, listen, the President of the United States, I believe, has been one of the most propagandized individuals on the planet. I think that's what makes him a danger. I don't think he is a particularly bright man, but he is easily manipulated by propaganda. He is a product of that. I think the difference between him and any other casual Fox News viewer is that he had the wherewithal to run for office, and I liken him to the T-Rex stamping around Jurassic Park that got out of the cage, and the zookeepers just don't know what to do with it. But as long as he's eating the liberals, it's fine. So self-diagnosing and working your way around being propagandized, you dive into that a little bit. You want to expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things, it's really hard because it usually takes some sort of experience where the world that you understand, the box that you've sort of created, fails to work.
Yeah.
You're like, it doesn't fit in here anymore.
Yeah, we call we call that the FO. We're going through FAFO, and now we're hoping that some of our citizens, our fellow Americans, are going to go through the found out part and have that realization, the light bulb moment.
Yeah, so that's usually, the kind of the slap upside the head that gets most people. But I mean, you can also do it by just learning history, reading how this tool came about. I mean, never, and learning infrastructure belief is probably, a little bit too late for us to get into that in detail, but that's in the book, and figure, and then you can sort of evaluate, like, okay, maybe I need to be a little bit more self-awareness over the very things you trust, the side you trust the most. Yeah. You have to be the most wary about, because they're not trying to, propagandize the left from the right side. Mm-hmm. They're not. Mm-hmm. And they're not trying to propagandize the right from the left side.
You're right.
They're feeding the propaganda right through. And there's an interesting Creel in his book I talked about earlier. He said he's laughing too. And this guy who's reading the newspaper, and he says in the very paper where he's reading that the Creel Committee is an iniquity of the devil, he says, I'm getting him my stuff. Right? Mm-hmm. Right. So he's basically saying, each side is going to gravitate toward, they're going to talk the language that, this guy's a friend, this guy's on it, mm-hmm. He understands. And then they're going to get stuff of theirs fed through there.
And it's funny. I did this exercise myself where I removed a lot of the biased social media follows and whatnot that were permeating my news feed.
Yeah.
I did. I just stopped following a lot of these, democracy, this, that, and the other, Occupy Democrat. I stopped following them.
Right.
Because first of all, I didn't need it. I didn't need what they were pushing. Right. I already knew what the spin was, and I know what the truth is. And I found myself, again, becoming just a more informed citizen. Heaven forbid. Yeah. Not that it changed my philosophy or my ideology.
Right.
It's like when you drink a soda and you're like, ugh, I know there's a lot of food coloring in this and it's not going to make me feel good, but, it satisfies the thirst for the time being. It's that becoming self-aware and sort of filtering out the nonsense so that you can be a little bit more aware about what actually is happening.
Right. You want to be able to, I guess too, one of the things is if something is like strikes you as an anomaly, follow it up.
Yes.
If
it seems too good to be true, ask questions, do your research.
Right. There's, the first side always seems real. And this is why I put that court of law segment in here in the propaganda detective, because, you hear the first side of the story and you go, oh God, they're right, And then you hear the other side, the other witness comes in. You're like, oh, this is getting harder.
Yeah.
And the problem with, there's that phrase, the truth will out. Well, here's the thing. Yes, it will, but 25 years later doesn't help us as much. Yeah. But that's why you learn history, because you see repeatedly that the truth finally flushes out 25 years later, because lots of money and power is going to keep truth submerged. So in the present time, we're at a decided disadvantage, because all kinds of money is going to hide things that we need to really understand the world.
But where do you find the history when it's getting buried all the time, or being, rewritten by interest groups?
Well, I see where I've done most of my investigation is I don't go to the historians. I go to the guys of that time period. And that like I love Josephson, because he basically says, we're the politicians, you have to look at them not by what they say, but by what they do. He was saying that, way back in the Civil War era. And he goes, because you're not going to get the right thing. So he writes the book from that perspective, okay, this is what they were saying all the time, but here, and that era too is unique because we have letters and papers, Ron, right? And like now we have emails and telephone. We'll never get the real deal on a lot of things happening now. But these guys saved their papers that went to libraries. And so a lot of those researchers can go and say, okay, well, he was publicly saying this, he was writing this, So anyways, I know, people don't have that much time. And well, I'm writing my second book now, to go a little bit deeper history. And there was just more to tell, more of the story to tell. So hopefully that's going to come out in June. But we've got to be better, because they repeat the same things over again, right? Like I'm reading in Josephson, and when they're talking about the dark horse, right? They continually, after the Civil War, they gravitated toward men, in many cases, like Grover Cleveland, right? Benjamin Harris, the Ohio group. These were nondescript men that weren't really known that well, and that they could paint them whatever they wanted. So they went away from the guys like Blaine, who had a record and a track record, right? And they're still doing that. You know what I mean? So you'll learn a lot about, oh my God, nothing's changed.
Yeah, and I think that's the frustrating thing for me. I'm a historian junkie. I love diving into history and seeing the things that we've gone through before, and seeing that we're walking into some similar mistakes again, and that's what frustrates me. All right. Author Michelle Stiles, One Idea to Rule Them All, Reverse Engineering American Propaganda. We'll include in the show notes your ability to purchase that. I'll find something other than Jeff Bezos' Amazon to do that. Michelle, thank you so much for joining the Ron Show today. I appreciate the conversation.
Oh, well, thank you for having me, Ron. It's been my pleasure.
Being a J-school dropout myself, I can tell you, and listen, I worked in newspaper offices for a few years while in high school and college. I can tell you, reporters don't like being the story. The story last night was that Republican House member Rich McCormick came back to his district to do a town hall in Roswell. And that is in North Fulton County, which is the red portion of Fulton County, which is a mostly blue county, obviously. But he was met before an overflow crowd that wanted to know when he and other folks in Congress were going to step up to the tyrannical efforts, the chainsaw effects of DOGE making cuts, only to realize, oh, we fired the nuclear people, we need to rehire them. Oh, we fired CDC people in the midst of bird flu, we need to... Listen to this exchange. This is just one of many from last night.
Workers from the nuclear workers, the NNSA, our nuclear stockpile, and CDC workers working on the bird flu being fired by DOGE and then having to be rehired when someone realizes, oh gosh, we need those people. Why is a supposedly conservative party taking such a radical and extremist and sloppy approach to this?
Now, before you go saying, oh, those are just Democratic operatives, actually the North Fulton Democrats were meeting separately in Sandy Springs, where they elected new folks on their committee. I know this because Seth Taylor, who has been a guest on this show before, is on that North Fulton Democratic Club committee. I believe he's the chair of it, if I'm not mistaken. He's also city captain for the Fulton County Democratic Party in Sandy Springs. And he posted about all of this last night on social media, invited me to them. He does that every month. Bless his heart. Something always comes up when he invites me. But yeah, those were not Democratic operatives in Roswell last night.
So I've been down to CDC several times. Actually, Dr. Howery, one of my former attendings, works there, and I'm in close contact with the CDC. They have about 13,000 employees? 13,000 employees at the CDC. In the last couple of years, those probationary people, which is about 10% of their employee base, which is about 1,300 people, which you're referring to, a lot of the work they do is duplicitous with AI. Once again, one of the problems we have. I happen to be a doctor. I know a few things. Okay, just give me here's what we know. If you have 13,000 employees, and I'm sure you're aware of the size of government, the second biggest leading job creators in the last 4 years has been government, next to healthcare. Healthcare first, government second.
However, the size of government actually hasn't kept up with the population growth of the last 40 years, but he's not going to mention that.
If we continue to grow the size of government and we can't afford it, it's going to have shortfalls in your Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, and other things that we can't afford, guys. We have to make some decisions.
Taxing the rich?
And one of the things with the CDC, in my opinion, in my humble opinion, this is my opinion, you may disagree with it, but in my opinion, when you make those 10% cuts to the new hires, a lot of it is duplicitous jobs. And I've talked to Dr. Howell, and I've talked to the CDC director, and I'm in close contact with them, and I know how they do their research. And I know how computers work in ferreting out those information, the treatments, the recommendations, what they should and they shouldn't be done. And I believe that they could do more with less, just like the Marine Corps and everybody else does, when you have to do more with less in order to survive.
Again, those are not Democratic operatives that are berating him in Roswell last night. So I mentioned that journalists don't like being the story. Here's where Greg Bluestein, a reporter with the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, sort of became part of the story. Veteran journalist Jamie Dupree over on Blue Sky, writing that over on X, simple tweets by my colleague Greg Bluestein of the Atlanta Journal-Constitution have been blocked. They were nothing but video of a town hall held by Representative Rich McCormick, where he was asked questions about Doge. Many journalists are trying to hang on at the Twitter X platform because that was a hub for journalistic activity for so many years prior to Elon Musk. And now Elon Musk and Doge, maybe not him personally, but the platform itself is set up to suppress anything negatively said about Doge. Although I must say, it's quite delicious that Elon Musk got community noted by a Cumming resident Georgia Tech graduate when Elon Musk spent some time earlier this week trying to politicize NASA's efforts to bring astronauts home from the International Space Station after the Boeing Starliner incident last year. 27-year-old Ken Kirtland made that point clear on the Twitter X platform, writing to Elon, just to make this clear, the Musk lie about the astronauts isn't a SpaceX offered a mission. The lie is that NASA and even Biden administration didn't want SpaceX to bring the astronauts home because he no likey Elon. Kirtland goes on, why would NASA pay for a whole new Crew Dragon mission, $200 million plus, to interrupt the ISS schedule to bring astronauts back a few months earlier for no reason, when they could just leave them on the ISS for free, put them to work on the station, which is what's happening, and bring them back on the next scheduled Dragon, which is what they decided. Ken Kirtland wraps the tweet by saying, answer that f***ing question or shut the f*** up. Elon responds, you are the liar, and the people you cite were not party to the discussions. Liar. So then he got community noted. Ken Kirtland, 17, hasn't made any false claims. There are all sorts of citations. And then Ken comes in and slam dunks. Hey, I think you forgot to read the part where I said, answer that f***ing question or shut the f*** up. We noted earlier this week, by the way, that Trump's polls are already underwater earlier than any time in American history for a newly elected president. Lowest poll numbers for any newly elected president at this point in their presidency. Elon Musk's are even worse. He's in the mid-30s. And Donald Trump can't at all like that drag on his popularity. This is going to be a popcorn-popping, sit-back-and-watch soap opera. Unfortunately, we're all on the ride while these two are piloting the plane. So strap in. Oh, I wish I had more time. You had Jesse Waters on Fox News finally complaining about Doge cuts because someone he knows got cut. And he thinks that Doge should be a little bit more surgical. Meanwhile, at CPAC, Elon Musk is showing up on stage with a chainsaw. You can't make this stuff up. Listen, CPAC should be broadcast for everyone to see because it is a nutty show. But I digress. That's it for my time today. I want to thank author Michelle Stiles. One Idea to Rule Them All is the book. Go out and get that. I'll include a link for you to buy that in the show notes at ronshowatl.com. Sunday's my birthday, so I'm taking the week off. We'll have some best ofs rolling for you next week. 9 a.m., 5 p.m. on America One Radio, 11 p.m. Progressive Voices via TuneIn. Take care.